During the incubation period, you will check from time to time on the progress of the mycelial growth. Check them every 3 or 4 days, but otherwise leave them to their darkness. Within a week or so of inoculation, mycelium will begin to form in small circles in the areas called inoculation points. In the following weeks, mycelium will grow outward until it colonizes the entire jar. While you are monitoring its progress, also be on the lookout for contaminants. Any strange discolorations or smells are an indication of contamination. The only exception to this is a bluish-purple discoloration that occurs where mycelium of Psilocybe cubensis mushrooms have been touched or bumped. However, bruising rarely occurs to mycelium that is contained in a jar. Blue bruising is normal for Psilocybe cubensis, but one must be able to distinguish it from a true contaminant. A clever incubation method for beginners is to place the substrate jars in a dark container directly on top of, or in the cupboard above, a fridge. You will notice the fridge creates warmth here. This is an ideal method for small incubation batches. Always use a thermometer just to be sure. Here is a simple homemade incubator made from a modified fridge. The fridge itself is not plugged in, but it is good because it is large, has shelves, and is dark and insulated. A light bulb, mounted in a separate chamber at the bottom, is wired to a thermostat. When the temperature drops below 86 degrees, the light comes on, creating heat. When it is warm enough, the light shuts off. This display shows the temperature inside the fridge. When full, this homemade incubator can hold hundreds of canning jars. Placing the culture in a cold fridge will keep the culture alive, but bring growth to a near standstill. This is useful if the grower needs to stall production or wants to preserve a culture for use in the future. During the time that your jars are incubating, build your terrarium. A terrarium is a semi-airtight chamber that will house the fully colonized substrate cakes during the final phases of growth when fruit bodies develop. Sealable plastic containers are ideal terrariums. If they are made of dark materials or the lids are dark, then cut out a square hole and glue on a plexiglass window so that light is able to get in. Drilling small, quarter-inch holes along the bottom of the terrarium is good for air exchange. This will help to minimize carbon dioxide buildup, which will slow growth. Glass aquariums with plastic wrap or plexiglass for a lid can also be used, but may be unnecessarily heavy. The main function of a terrarium is to maintain high humidity. Mushrooms need high humidity throughout their life cycle. Humidity is retained while the substrate stays in the jar, but will need another source when removed from the jar. There are at least 3 ways to humidify a terrarium. 1 is the spray bottle method, 2 is to use a humidifier, and 3 is the perlite method. The spray bottle method requires the grower to spray water into the terrarium several times a day. A shield of some sort protects the substrate cakes from the spray because direct water drops will harm mycelium. The spray bottle method is time-consuming and outdated. Many growers with large terrariums use electric humidifiers. A cool mist or vaporizer style humidifier, fixed with a short length of tubing to modify the flow of moisture, works well in many situations. However, for most small terrariums, complicated humidifier setups are unnecessary. A much easier method is the perlite method. This method works great and there is virtually no maintenance. Simply line the bottom of a terrarium with a ½ inch of perlite that has been saturated with water. To saturate the perlite, place it into a large colander and dip it into a sink or a large bowl of water for a minute or two, and then remove it and let it drain for 5 minutes. A small amount of peroxide can be mixed into the water to help keep it sterile. Pour the saturated perlite into the terrarium, spread it out evenly, and then cover it with a ½ inch layer of dry perlite. The perlite retains a great deal of water. Eventually, enough moisture will evaporate from the wet perlite to bring the relative humidity in the terrarium up to 100%. A hygrometer can be used to monitor the humidity. The relative humidity is the amount of moisture in the air measured on a scale from 0 to 100. A terrarium used to fruit rice flour and vermiculite cakes should be kept at or near 100% humidity. Anywhere from 85 to 100% humidity should be fine for a rice flour cake terrarium. Perlite humidification will achieve this easily. Experienced growers can guess the level of relative humidity by observing the density of moisture buildup that can be seen on the inner walls of the terrarium. Beware that inexpensive hygrometers are not always accurate. Fully saturated perlite will keep a terrarium humidified for weeks. If the perlite does dry out, simply apply more water. Be careful never to get drops of water directly on the cakes, because this could encourage contamination. Even though this humidification method requires no maintenance, it is still necessary for the grower to remove excess carbon dioxide. Do this by removing the lid once or twice daily and fanning. Carbon dioxide is heavy, so it will sit at the bottom of the terrarium along the perlite. Fan vigorously for 10 seconds or so, 2 to 3 times a day. Holes drilled along the bottom of the terrarium will help minimize unwanted carbon dioxide buildup. The effectiveness of the perlite method will depend on the volume of your terrarium. Anything larger than a regular-sized cooler may require more assertive humidification techniques. Soon after the substrate becomes fully colonized, it can be removed from the jar. Check the substrate one last time for contaminants. To remove the substrate, remove the lid and first scrape out the loose layer of vermiculite at the top of the jar. Turn the jar upside down. You may need to slam the jar down once or twice. A fully colonized substrate is not vulnerable to airborne contaminants because the mushroom mycelium is well established, and so other germs can't get a foothold.